Welcome to episode 31 of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's podcast is entitled The Power of Story. Story is our Soul Matters topic this month, and much of the podcast is inspired by the work of Brené Brown, specifically her book, Rising Strong. So, without further ado, let's jump into the live recording, beginning with a reading delivered by Mel Moss.
I invite you now into a place of deeper stillness and reflection with this reading from Brené Brown's book, Rising Strong. You may not have signed up for a hero's journey, but the second you fell down, got your butt kicked, suffered a disappointment, screwed up, or felt your heart break, it started. It doesn't matter whether we are ready for an emotional adventure, hurt happens. And it happens to every single one of us, without exception. The only decision we get to make is what role we'll play in our own lives. Do we want to write the story, or do we want to hand that power over to someone else? Choosing to write our own story means getting uncomfortable. It's choosing courage over comfort.
Choosing our own story, choosing to write our own story, means getting uncomfortable. It is choosing courage over comfort. I spent some time with Dr. Brown this week. I haven't found a book she's written yet that's not worth the time to read it more than once. As a follow-up to last week's sermon, I made 3 promises. I said that we were going to look at how story blinds us, how it gives us the power to remake the world, and how it can transform ourselves and our interpersonal relationships. And as I was rereading the book Rising Strong, a structure for that conversation materialized. So when she was working with the leadership team at Pixar Animation Studios, she was introduced to the story-making structure that they use whenever they're making a film. So the film always has 3 acts. In the first act, the protagonist is introduced, and the setting and the world and the rules of the world are introduced. Maybe that's us at the beginning of every journey. We see the world as we think it is. We see the world often as we have been told it is. But Act 1 always ends in the same way. It ends with an inciting event, a crisis. The nature of the crisis often relates to the following thing. The view you had of the world had some inaccuracies in it. The world isn't showing up as you thought it was or as you thought it should be. It showed up in some other way, and you find yourself unequipped or ill-equipped for this new challenge. Whatever story we have believed about the way the world is not just a way of seeing, it is also a way of blinding. Because everything that we center in our view takes some other object and puts it in the periphery, and some other object and puts it right back here in our blind spot where we can't see. We can think about the work of Howard Zinn or other historians who have been rewriting histories to include the stories of more people, because it has become so painfully obvious that to tell the traditional story leaves so many stories on the cutting room floor that it's not accurate enough to understand what's happening. As we emphasized from James Baldwin last week, stuck in a history that we don't understand. Stuck in a history because we don't understand. So, we have at the end of Act 1 an inciting incident, something that makes us realize that things have changed and that the mismatch between the moment that we're at and the story we had believed has to give somewhere. So we move into Act 2 of the story. Act 2 is characterized by the following struggle. I am going to try and find every comfortable, normal, acceptable way possible to solve this problem. I am going to exhaust my conventional toolkit. Maybe it's not really a crisis. Maybe I just haven't looked at it right yet. The culmination of Act 2 is inevitably a deepening of the crisis. Brené Brown describes it as the lowest of the low. 12-step programs describe it as hitting rock bottom. Brené Brown, when she talks about spending time in the arena, talks about it as finding yourself face down on the floor of the arena. That moment when you realize that all your attempts to apply your previous toolkit to this new problem have not resulted in victory, but deepened the crisis. Whatever disconnect happened at the end of Act 1 has now culminated in, oh, I really don't have this. There's no comfortable way or easy way out of this moment. Rock bottom might be required for human transformation. I don't know. I've given it an inordinate amount of thought. I don't know if you all know, there's a line of philosophy that argues that progress isn't possible without hardship. The hard version is called the strong adversity hypothesis. The problem is this, that I have with the strong adversity hypothesis, is that if you take it seriously, we would want to build the worst schools possible for our children. Which doesn't quite work for me. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I lean back on the words of Stephen Jenkinson. He says that you don't have to break it. Life knows well enough how to break your heart, and it's going to do the hard work for you. Life is going to show up with that adversity. We don't have to bake it into the system. We don't have to intentionally produce dangerous, negative, harmful, toxic systems to create great people. Even when things seem smooth, adversity seems to find us. So, we hit rock bottom, and the truth is that the view is different from down there. In the middle of Act 2, we've written what Brené Brown calls an SFD. The polite version is a sorry first draft. If you've read Brené Brown, you know that the first word is a curse word. It goes something like this. The story I'm telling myself is. The story I'm telling myself is that I can solve this in a conventional way and I don't have to change. I just need to get the world back to the way it was supposed to be before this adventure started. But I'm going to take a quick side trip here and let you know that this language, the story I'm telling myself, is tremendously useful as an interpersonal thing. Your spouse just did something that hurt your feelings. Out loud, the story I'm telling myself is that you don't care enough about what happened to me at work today to give me your attention. I want you to hear how that is different than you don't love me, you're not paying attention to me, you don't care about me. See, the latter is an accusation. The former is an invitation. The story I'm telling myself is, and you'll notice that if you use this tool, when you say that, SFD, it is usually a very bad first draft because it's usually 98% about you. The story I'm telling myself is that I'm the most important thing in the universe and you have forgotten that for a few moments. Anybody recognize that pattern? Yeah? And then you hear the other person's story and you're like, oh, actually the reason you reacted to me that way had nothing to do with me. You were in your own 98 too. You were 98% in your own head because of whatever was going on in your life. Brené tells a story in this book where she's on vacation with her husband. They're out at Lake Travis and they go for a swim, which is something they used to do when they were dating but hadn't done in a long time, and they're going for a swim, and she makes what we call in the relationship business a bid for connection. Oh, honey, I'm so glad to be out here swimming with you. We haven't done this in so long. And he's like, yeah, good swim. She's like, what's going on here? Is this swim? You know, she's like, okay, I can be brave. I'll try again. I'm really just so glad that we're here together. Yeah, good swim. She gets back to the dock. She's like, okay, the story I'm telling myself is that you either think that I can't rock this Speedo anymore at my age or, she starts listing off. And he's like, actually, what's going on for me is that I know that later today I'm going to be down here on the lake with all the kids, and it's just going to be me while you're hanging out with your sisters, which I'm cool with, but I had a nightmare last night that a speedboat was barreling toward us, and I had all the kids, and I couldn't figure out how to keep them safe. And I dragged the kids underwater to save them from a speedboat, and I could tell they were starting to drown, but I felt like I couldn't go up. Right? So she's telling herself a story that this bid for connection was declined because he wants a divorce, or she's unable to pretend that she's still got a 20-year-old body. Like all the normal human things that we go through. He's on his own journey. Right? We're on our own journeys, especially with these overactive minds we got. So, the story I'm telling myself is a chance, it's a gambit, an entree into getting curious with the people you love about what story is going on in your head right now. I'll share mine, and it's not flattering. I'm not trying to make myself look good. I'm not trying to make myself look pretty. I'm just being honest that, I got 6 insecurities, and 4 of them are triggered right now. And here's what that sounds like in my head. You don't really think I can do this job. You don't think I love you enough. Whatever it is, right? Being willing to share with the people we love that sorry first draft can go a long way to returning authenticity and intimacy to relationships that are strained by the normalness of all that goes on. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it that goes on. We heard in Joys and Concerns this morning how much is going on in the lives of everyone we're sitting here with. And those of us who've been doing this for a little while know that for every one person who raised their hand, there were 3 thinking about it. If we had all day, we could get in a circle and go around. I bet we wouldn't get a whole bunch of people passing saying, yeah, I really got nothing today. Free and breezy. Nothing going on here. All right. So that's our side trip into the story I'm telling myself. What does Act 3 look like? Act 3 is the redemption. Act 3 is it's not the world that has to change. It is I who must change to meet this new understanding of the world. After all my attempts to get the world back into its right place, I have recognized that it's not going back. It's only going forward, and I've got to get on this train or it's going to run me over. Now, you'll notice that heroes in these stories, the protagonists, they can never do that just by talking about it. It is a thing of action. They have to do something that shows that they've resynchronized with this new understanding of the world. That is the act of transformation. The first thing is called reflection, right? We can think about it all we want. If the thinking doesn't result in changed behavior, the hero is still in Act 2. I want you to hear that. If the reflection doesn't result in changed behavior, you're still in Act 2. Maybe you told yourself a story. The story I'm telling myself is, I just moved from Act 2 to Act 3 without having to do the really hard work of transformation. Act 2 is where you get to tell yourself the story that the way things are going in this country, let's say 8 years ago or so, was a fluke, or not really an expression of what your siblings believe or where they're at in their reckoning with the types of histories that blind us. You do not have the luxury of that illusion today. We are, folks, in a large cultural sense, at the end of Act 2. We are face down on the mat looking at a world that is not the world we hoped it was from a changed perspective. What transformation does that require of you? That's what I'm going to send you and me home with today. What act of transformation, of not thinking differently, but behaving differently, is required of you to meet this moment? I'm going to call on James Baldwin again for my final words as part of this message, because what he said, what I read from him last week has been resonating with me all week. They are your younger brothers, and we must, through our love, show them the truth of how things are. We must, through our love, show them the truth of how things are. That's the redemption of Act 3. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help others find us by liking and subscribing. If you're so moved, you can even leave us a review. All reviews will be gratefully received. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The Pulpiteer Podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. Our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn.